Understand it is recorded. If you have a question or something to say, you would prefer, you want me to stop the recording transiently because there's something you wish to say, that's fine. Just let me know. And yes, I'm receptive to questions. If I'm not, I'll let everybody know that I have a certain amount of material I have to get through in a relatively limited period of time. So to that end, we start here. I actually have both the PowerPoints from this and from the previous text we use, because sometimes they will overlap or have illustrations or commentary that I find useful in that regard. Everybody can see this with the lights on. I don't have to flip the lights off. Eventually, I'll get up and walk around. Gives me an idea. Aha. You got to have a theme. The theme for today: emergent theme for today. I don't know if we'll always have a theme for today, but we will. So, basic introductory stuff. Medicine's very interesting, and medical science is very interesting. I don't necessarily agree with all of these things. Yes, a lot of the things that we are using, understand, ancient civilizations spent a lot of good things working with, laid the foundation. Ancient Egypt, I do not know about Eastern medicine, Eastern medical science, as it were. There's a long history. I probably should probably take some time to study that. And you'll learn that a good professor or a good instructor is more than happy to use these three words. It's okay. I'm comfortable with that. You can't know everything, and you as students, you will learn. If you haven't learned already, you probably have. You know when someone's up there BSing you. Nevertheless, so I usually try to qualify that. Ancient Egypt, they were talking about this. The first time we began to hear about cancer was in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. They were very attuned to medicine. Ancient Greece, ancient Rome, some of the surgical instruments that we use today, and indeed the hypodermic needle, if you will, the hypodermic syringe, came from ancient Rome for treating the gladiators. Even though they were not the medicus, the ones who did that, who were the predecessors of healers, were not particularly held in high esteem. Gladiators were slaves. So understand that there was a lot that went on. We went through a period after the fall of Rome where, at least in Western knowledge and medication and medical science, where we called it the Dark Ages for a variety of reasons. And what happened was it was frowned upon. We felt that when people got sick, it was the devil, it was an act of God, all of those types of things. You were limited in what you could do. People they'd put things like bird dung, bird poop, on wounds, which would make them clot, but imagine with the infection that was being, and anyone who didn't follow the accepted treatments was doing things that were heretical and were subject to the appropriate level of punishments, which weren't very good. And this kind of began to sort of foster itself until the start of the Renaissance. So it was at that point where the study was resumed of medicine. But even the early healers, sure, there was superstition and magic, but a lot of the early treatments, willow bark, that's where we get aspirin from, the first of the ancient things that were there. Penicillin is the most common mold, white bread mold. If you got some moldy bread in your refrigerator, most likely it's got penicillin on it. I'm not telling you to eat that, but it's very, very common. Understand that. This stuff's been around. It's in nature. Most of our antibiotics are all derived from things that are commonly found in nature. That's the definition of an antibiotic, which you'll hear about when you take microbiology, as many of you will. Okay, so the whole idea of being able to understand these things began to sort of come back to us, so to speak, as we got into, the Renaissance, the rebirth, as it will. And even then, it was very, very difficult types of acceptance. And so what happened over time, we began to look at more about observation and wound healing, and particularly studying dead bodies, which was verboten, it was forbidden. How do you think that Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo Buonarroti were able to do those marvelous sculptures and things like that? At night, down in somebody's cellar, they were looking at dead bodies. And indeed, that's it. That's from, look at the date. That's Vesalius. Really, I mean, that's where they began to study. There's latissimus dorsi, there are the deltoids, there's the trapezius, all those wonderful, your hamstrings, gluteus maximus, etc. All those muscles, they didn't change. Human body hasn't changed. So that's all part of it. Okay, so they began to, that's how they began to dissect them. And you see those magnificent lifelike sculptures and painting and things like that. It's remarkable. And really the whole idea of anatomy literally means to cut something up. The omi suffix we use today, when you're doing a surgical procedure, if you're making a cut in bone, it's called an osteotomy, to cut into something. If you're removing a section of bone, it's called an osteectomy. So when you ectomize, you remove it. When you and it's a whole new language for many of you are going to have to learn. Okay, some of it you'll get here, some of it you'll acquire depending on your fields of endeavor. But a lot of times it will be the root word, osteo for bone, myo for muscle. There's other names for muscle. Okay, neuro for nerve. Some of them are fairly straightforward. So all of that, and physiology, ology means the study of, physio, kind of, I mean, if you look at the definition, it's kind of how things work. So we really evolved into function more than anything else. And so this was really where a lot of it is, and a lot of it was scientific method. I'm sure you've had that. It's typically observation, getting you have an idea how something works, you form what we call a hypothesis. Okay, and then you find a way to test it, and then you test it X amount of times in the hopes that if it continues to be true the vast majority of those times, now you have something that can sort of work its way up into what we call a theory. Laws really have been around for a long time. We have, evolution is still a theory. We'll talk about cell theory. So theory isn't like, I got an idea. When we talk in a science classroom, a theory is a theory. Oh, it's missing. I am going to have a kitty. You know what's not here? It makes this a science classroom that we're going to need? The periodic table of elements. I don't know where you come from, where I went to school. If it was a science classroom, I had one in here. Commander recount. So anatomy, cut it up, physiology, functions, relationship to nature. I didn't recall that part of the definition. And the interrelationship is so clear, and it's magnificent. We will see it here. Take bone. Okay, bone. Marvelous. That was me. I forgot to tell you, I'm guilty first. Well, Dr. Robbins, he'll have a kitty. Probably, if you send to his syllabus, he'll have a kitty. I turn off your, that's my daughter-in-law. So to understand train of thought, I was just at that ding. What was I talking about? I have to go back and look. You're not helping. Yeah. Oh, the relationship bone, study and function. So the relationship between structure and function is everywhere. Bone are concentric, but one goes in one direction, one in the other direction. Layers of a material that you're going to learn about called collagen, the most abundant connective tissue in the body. Inside of that collagen, it has a protein that attracts calcium. And so so here you have things that are inherently strong, because imagine it goes one way, then it goes the other way. Then it goes one way, then it goes the other way. Concentrically, one layer on top of the other, and then it attracts calcium to harden. It's got to be something that's strong and solid. That's bone. So you'll see it all the time. In muscle, you'll see each little segment is identical. And when they contract, they basically shorten. And then it's not so much that they bend, but the shortening, and then based on the structure, will cause a particular type of contraction, whether it's concentric or eccentric, and different things that you'll learn about that are there. You'll see all of this. So you always, I know a lot of times you'll see the relationship with that in every textbook. That's really something to understand because and that's what anatomists did. They saw something, they say this interesting muscular structure right in the middle, and all it does is this. It's a heart that pumps more rapidly than once a second every second of your lifetime. Talk about an endurance athlete, the ultimate endurance athlete. So all of these, and we'll look at these. There's a difference between an abnormality and what's called an anomaly. An anomaly is something that's odd, but not unheard of. It's like people will, about a third to half of the people have like an extra slip of muscle or an extra slip of tendon. We'll see it scientifically. Someone will pull a calf muscle and they'll be out 3 to 6 weeks. And they say, oh, they tore a muscle. Well, there's a little thing called a plantaris that about a third to a half of us have. Rather than being a full-blown tear of either gastrocnemius or soleus, they're done for a while. It's like a spare part. Wonderful. We're born with these spare parts. You can sever that plantaris and use that as a biological suture to fix Achilles tendon tears. It's either Lindholm, maybe it's the Lindholm technique. They all have different names. So it's remarkable the amount of, so some of these extra pieces are neat. So we have little muscles and little tendons. So having that to some ways what we call an anomaly. I mean, you wouldn't even call having an extra finger or an extra toe that much of an abnormality. They're more common than you think, and they're easily treated cosmetically, as opposed to being an abnormality like your heart's on the wrong side, which does happen, but extraordinarily rarely developmentally. So there's some interesting things like that. You're an abnormality or a pediatric heart that still is that it doesn't really change sufficiently after birth, and we have a lot of pediatric cardiac abnormalities, which you learn about. Particularly, you'll learn about those in nursing and things like that. Something called the tetralogy of Fallot. There's 4 things that disappear. If you're like me, I'm a sportsaholic. That's right. I'm wearing the Steelers gear. Don't be here on a Monday if the Steelers didn't have a successful weekend. Not a happy camper. Fair warning. Just letting you know. But you'll see it. So if you like hockey and Chris Letang, he has one part of that. It's called a patent foramen ovale. Foramen means an opening. Ovale gives you the shape. So there's an oval-shaped opening that shunts the blood because mom's doing the breathing for the baby before the baby's born. And it's supposed to close up. He's got a little pinhole in here. But when blood goes through a little pinhole, creates turbulence, makes clot. He's had a couple of those that have been significant. Okay. There's procedures you can do through a catheter, feeding it up, which he has had done to try to close that or limit that possibility. It's more common than you think. My middle child has been evaluated for that. There was some concern over one of the scans that he may or may not have had one. It's never been looked at that closely. He's probably maybe a year or 2 older than Chris Letang. Okay. That kind of stuff. And so you're going to see this. I don't know what that means. I'm not sure about that one. This is the emergent properties. Okay. That's why we're going to take it back. The start of the second chapter is protons, neutrons, electrons, all stuff you've had. Okay. Just reviewing it my way. We're going to look at the periodic table as soon as I get my boss to make sure I won't get stuck up here. Okay? Subatomic particles. This is what I mean by we're all composed of these. Protons, neutrons, and electrons. Ultimately, they make up the cells. But effectively, a proton, a neutron, and an electron don't have an identity of their own. They only develop an identity when they come together in specific numbers and arrangements, which we call atoms. Extraordinarily small. That whole thing we'll get to with Avogadro's number. Remember that 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd? That's a lot of zeros. Okay? Those are, and we'll take a look at why carbon is so special. Why we are a biological entity that's carbon-based. We're organic. Carbon to carbon and carbon to hydrogen bonds. But as soon as they come together in this form, okay, at that point, Now they have a new identity. That's an emergent property. They went from having no identity, and now all of a sudden, there's something specific about them. Carbon has, because of the arrangements, and we'll go over this, has the ability to find what are called covalent bonds, particularly something called non-polar covalent bonds. And the more you have those, the more, and this is a key concept that you're going to get used to, the more that you're going to have something that's made of them that is going to be fat soluble versus something that is water soluble. You'll be amazed at how important it is, the whole idea about oil and water don't mix. Because that's the basis of how things can get in and out of cells. If they're fat soluble and small enough, they can work their way through membranes, because membranes are made out of fat. If they're too big and they're not fat soluble, we have to have channels. And proteins make up these special passageways that allow some stuff to go in and some stuff to go out. Different kinds of doorways that allow things to go in and out. It's amazing. So atoms, now we end up with another emergent property, but they miss something between these. Okay, in a second, not this first level. So when you have more than one atom, it can be the same, okay, and have a different property. So you can have, for instance, hydrogen by itself, which you very rarely see in nature. But hydrogen inevitably bonds with something, but if we see it in nature, it's a gas, H2. Same thing with oxygen, O2, the molecule. And understand, what they're talking about there are a different subset of molecules called compounds. So when they talk about water, H2O, you have more than one atom, but the atoms are not identical. Salt, glucose. Those are compounds. And they all have different properties. Hydrogen and oxygen are gases, which means they're gases at room temperature. Salt is solid at room temperature. It's totally different the way it's held together. Water, obviously, a liquid at room temperature. So now you have yet another emergent property. What inevitably these PowerPoints forget, okay, so this one seems to be doing a pretty good job now, is what happens for molecules, they become macromolecules. Macro just means big. Micro means tiny. Theoretically, micro means not visible to the eye. So when you have these tiny molecules, you start to put them together, you get macromolecules. Okay. What's a macromolecule? So it could be anything that we're going to study. It can be something like a chain of carbohydrates, like starch. It could be the category of carbohydrates, particularly complex ones, as opposed to simple ones, which are small molecules. So these are macro and bigger. And the most famous ones, DNA and RNA. Another famous ones, protein. Fats are sort of that. We'll talk about that because fats basically just come together, they're not bonded together. That's kind of unusual. Fats just sort of cuddle together, and that's why things can they're compatible. You can get through it. This is a membrane. You see that, you put a sweet through it. Kind of neat. So those are macromolecules, yet they all have different properties. Certainly DNA and RNA, for example, would be the best examples of an emergent property. I mean, DNA creates the whole code for life, and it expresses itself, by making something called RNA, and then the RNA further expresses itself by making the proteins. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, you are what your proteins say you are. Simply. It's like me. I'm not short, vertically challenged. I'm not heavy, vertically challenged. I've looked at those height weight charts. 5'8" and a half, good size frame. I'm supposed to be, I would say 170, 175, but no. Based on my weight, I should be at least 6'2", maybe 6'3". Vertically challenged. It has nothing to do at all with my wife and I visiting occasionally the Oakmont Bakery. And we resisted yesterday because we were over by Harmon. I proposed it, she nixed it. Still upset. There was a bear claw. Oh. So again, vertically challenged. Not. I can take it again. Large, and these are big time players. So we have to look at those. And what they put together with when we get more than one of these, typically, in some fashion, if we take some RNA and we take a protein and we mix them together, like so and like so, we get into some little factories for making proteins. Okay? If we take the DNA and we take some proteins along with it and we encase it in a membrane, because all membranes by definition in living things are semi-permeable. Okay, what do we have? We have a nucleus. Emergent properties. Again, the whole idea. So now we have organelles. And now if we take organelles and put them together, what do we have? We have a cell. So all we have is a whole bundle of organelles. Whether it's the nucleus and this, and we're looking at our cells. This course is about what's called the eukaryotic cell, which is our cell as opposed to a bacteria, which is a single celled entity that does not contain a nucleus nor membrane bound organelles. We'll get into this, and it has some mitochondria that are there, and maybe it has some lysosomes and peroxisomes and all this. It's got endoplasmic reticulum, all of which we'll talk about. But now we have the first thing that could go on its own. We have something that functions independently. Bacteria are single-celled entities that they are living by definition. They can reproduce, they can do energy transformations, they respond to alterations in their environment. All that good stuff. They make stuff, they secrete stuff. A lot of times what they secrete, is dangerous to us. Typically they're toxins. Sometimes the bacteria, by their very nature, our bodies respond to adversely. Okay, and you'll learn about that, many of you in microbiology. That's all about it. So there's so much to that. It's crazy. Okay, so that's an emergent property itself. So it has all those basic units of structures and functions, and there's a whole variety, as you will see, of different kinds of cells. You'll see those cells as we study each unit, you'll see them in laboratory, you'll look at them microscopically, we'll do slides of them in here, all of those kinds of things that are there. But they can function on their own. And indeed, most of your cells function in a multicellular sense, aggregates. And those aggregates of cells form something called tissues. Okay? And so your skin has 3 layers. Okay? It has the epidermis, the outer layer, which has multiple layers, 5 distinctive, typically 4 or 5, depending on the thickness of the skin, layers of cells that form this tissue. Or you can have something that very, very limited, okay, where, for instance, they're talking about adipose tissue or fat has really a specific kind of a cell that's filled with fats as a storage vesicle. There's not a whole lot to it, but we refer to it as adipose or fatty tissue. Years ago, we used to think that was part of the skin. We know it is not. It's an underlayer called subcutaneous, which means under the skin. So you have 3 layers, the epidermis, you have the superficial dermis, and the deep dermis. Superficial, close to the surface, deep, closer to internally speaking. And they differ anatomically, and that's something you typically look at in lab, and we talk about a little bit of in here as well. Okay, so I try to reinforce some of the stuff in lab, and Dr. Robbins will reinforce some of the stuff that you get here in lecture. And there's all different kinds of cells. It's a construction material. There are a couple that function on their own. white blood cells are probably the best example of that. They function in large units, but they function independently. So when you get sick, you get that bacterial infection. You get a strep throat. Hordes, masses of those white blood cells go out on an attack. That's the whole idea. Okay, and so they're functioning independently, but the massive numbers act collectively to begin to control said infection, and we get better. Okay, so end up with cells, you get into tissues, and then so the immersion property is there as well. I mean, you take individual cells, now you have a fairly strong boundary. Whether it's a dry, hard boundary that's waterproof, your external skin, or inside, like inside your gums and your cheek, which is a moist boundary, but still very protective. And it's all the way down your alimentary canal. There. It's a boundary. It's like a hollow tube that goes through you, but changes in different levels with different kinds of outer lining cells and protective things like mucus. Chemicals, like your stomach makes tons of acid. Moving on. So you get the tissue there. When you get two or more types, so when you get a mass of cells, but once you get two or more types of tissue, now you have an organ. You must have at least two. It can be more than two. Your liver is fairly simple. It has a mass of cells, and a lot of organs are like that. You have a mass of one type of tissue, and another type of tissue kind of holds it in place. We call it a capsule. It's a fancy name. Some of them are more complicated. The heart, as important as it is, relatively uncomplicated. You have a smooth lining on the interior, you have a giant mass of muscles, and you have a smooth lining on the exterior. So it's got muscle tissue and it's got lining tissue. About it. You'll see the nuances that are there, the way it can conduct signals, the fact that we can get those things. We go into the whole science behind those wonderful AED machines we have. I'm sure many of you are up on CPR and all those things. I have a lot of students who are more not. I haven't had to up on CPR because the last time I did that was when I was operating in a hospital. It was a long time ago. It was 2000. It's 25 years. I wouldn't even know what's going on inside there now. It'd be too complicated, I guess. So that makes an organ. Kidney, series of tubes and membranes and blood vessels. It's an elaborate filter to cleanse your blood. It's surrounded by a hard capsule that you will see in the laboratory. I think you'll see this week in the laboratory. How firm and tough that is. Something is on the back wall. We call that retroperitoneal. And that hard little mound, if you cut into it, it's sturdy. The interior is soft and mushy, very membranous-like would be a way to describe it. And groups of organs, so there you have yet another immersion property, whether it filters the blood, whether it pumps the blood, whether it's a blood vessel that conducts the blood. And so now you get an organ system. So you get different organs that have that alimentary canal there we're talking about there with regard to digestive. That hollow tube and the structures that are around it, which are linings and muscle and nerves, change shape, have different roles. The stomach produces acid for it to function. It's basically a great big mixing bag for stuff that goes in. It starts the process. So there's very little absorption. When you get to the small intestine, that's the biggie. That's where the vast majority of your processing occurs, the vast majority of your digestion occurs, and the vast majority of your absorption occurs. And it's nearly done by the time the food's barely halfway through. Okay. Your colon, which comes after it, is non-essential. What does that mean? You don't have to have it to survive. But very, very useful. I mean, I'd rather have the pieces parts than no. But those are, even though they're part of the same system, they're different organs. You have the heart, you have arteries and veins. Very, very different. But very, very similar in the sense the walls are similar. There you have lining tissues inside and out, muscle tissue, elastic tissue, depending. Different kinds of connective tissue that are there. And all of this you'll see in the anatomy and physiology. Keep checking. I got 2 minutes. And if you put all of that together, whether it's, and go in and you'll see in the text, they'll review the systems. a nervous system with a brain and spinal cord, and that's the central nervous system. Everything sticking out of it is called the peripheral nervous system. All nervous system. Bones, the skeletal system. Skin, the integument, epidermis, dermis, okay, deep and superficial dermis that are there. And if we take all of those systems together, you got an us. You have an organism, which we are. If you want to take it into population biology, if you have all similar organisms, you have a population. If you have other organisms, you'll have a community, etc. You combine the communities, you'll have different areas for people who study that type of stuff. That's not my area of expertise. The ecology, the evolutionary biology, and things like that, my colleagues are much better versed than I am. And that's the idea of emergent properties, and that is the theme for today. And I think on that note, we should conclude. And so you can see this, all the different stuff that's there. This one is for, as you can see, circulatory system, all those neat types of things that are there. It looks like they're making DNA, and that's a heart muscle cells are branched, etc., etc. And we'll start here. Thank you. I enjoyed it. Make sure you get the sign-in sheet, wherever it went to. Sign in, give it back to me. I got to make one up for the next group of you folks who are coming in.
Professor, these lectures that we're going over now, are they going to be the main study tool to study for tests?
They're only, I would say, part of it.
Part of it.
With the study guide, the textbook materials.
The information that we need.
Mostly, if you listen to this real closely, you'll hear it. So if you're asking me, are emergent properties in this hierarchy going to be on the test? Short answer is yes. It may not be a big portion of it. It might be a question or two. It's not going to be 10 questions. It's like, what do 2 or more types of tissues make in order? That would be an example of a question.
So what other information will we be looking at that will be on the test?
Pardon me?
So, because this is the lecture.
Yeah.
What other information will we be
stuff in the reading, stuff in handout materials.
Handout material.
Okay. Sure. Let me do this. Where did I put everything?